There's a moment when you realize you've been living your entire life for an audience that doesn't even exist. You've been performing, accommodating, shrinking yourself down to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, all while believing this was love, this was connection. This was how you earn your place in the world. But what happens when you finally stop? What happens when you decide that your own approval matters more than theirs? If this speaks to something deep inside you, hit subscribe. This channel explores the truths about human nature that most people are afraid to face. Today we're diving into one of the most profound transformations a person can undergo: the shift from people-pleasing to authentic living. It's a journey that touches the very core of who you are, challenging everything you've been taught about relationships, success, and what it means to be a good person. Carl Jung understood that this transformation isn't just about changing behavior. It's about integrating the parts of yourself you've been hiding, the parts you've deemed unacceptable in your desperate attempt to be loved. The people-pleaser lives in a prison of their own making, one built from the belief that their worth depends entirely on external validation. But when you finally break free from this prison, the world doesn't end. Instead, something far more beautiful begins. When the performance finally ends, for most of your life, you've been wearing a mask so perfectly crafted that you forgot it wasn't your real face. This mask smiles when it wants to cry, says yes when it means no, and apologizes for existing when it should be celebrating its presence. The people-pleaser's mask is perhaps the most sophisticated of all psychological armor, because it doesn't just protect you from rejection, it protects others from the inconvenience of knowing who you really are. When you first begin to remove this mask, the world feels unstable. The people around you, accustomed to your predictable accommodations, suddenly don't know how to relate to you. Your boss, who could always count on you to work late without complaint, seems confused when you set boundaries around your time. Your friends, who knew they could always rely on your emotional labor, feel uncomfortable when you're no longer their constant source of validation and support. Your family, who took your endless giving for granted, suddenly views you as selfish when you stop sacrificing your needs for theirs. This is the great unmasking, and it's terrifying because you realize how much of your identity was built on being useful to others rather than valuable in your own right. Jung called this the confrontation with the persona, that carefully constructed public face we show the world. For the people-pleaser, the persona isn't just a social tool, it's become their entire sense of self. Without it, they feel naked, vulnerable, and uncertain of who they actually are beneath all that performed goodness. But here's what starts to happen in those first uncomfortable weeks and months of authenticity. You begin to remember feelings you haven't felt in years. You remember what it's like to have preferences that aren't immediately dismissed as selfish. You remember what it's like to feel angry without immediately apologizing for that anger. You remember what it's like to take up space without constantly checking if you're inconveniencing someone else. The unmasking isn't just about revealing yourself to the world, it's about revealing yourself to yourself. You discover that beneath all that people-pleasing was a person with opinions, desires, boundaries, and even a capacity for healthy selfishness that you'd buried so deep you forgot it existed. This person has been waiting patiently for you to remember them, to acknowledge them, to finally let them speak. How authenticity shakes your world. When you stop people-pleasing, your relationships don't just change. They undergo a complete seismic shift. Some relationships, the ones built on mutual respect and genuine connection, actually grow stronger. These people respect your newfound boundaries because they never wanted to take advantage of you in the first place. They celebrate your authenticity because they've been waiting for the real you to show up. But other relationships begin to crumble, and this is where the real psychological work begins. The people who were attracted to your endless giving, who thrived on your inability to say no, who felt comfortable in the relationship because they knew they would always come first, these people don't know what to do with the authentic you. They might call you selfish, difficult, or changed. They might try to guilt you back into your old patterns with phrases like, "You used to care about people," or "Success has gone to your head." What you're witnessing is what Jung would call the shadow projection being withdrawn. These people were projecting their own capacity for selfishness onto you, seeing you as the infinitely giving one so they didn't have to examine their own patterns of taking without reciprocating. When you stop accepting this projection, when you start showing your own healthy selfishness, they're forced to confront the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. This is why the people-pleaser's journey toward authenticity often feels like an earthquake. It doesn't just change you, it forces everyone around you to examine their own relationship patterns. Some people will rise to meet you in this new, more honest way of relating. Others will retreat, seeking out new people-pleasers who will allow them to continue their patterns of unconscious taking. The hardest part of this relationship earthquake isn't losing the takers. It's learning to trust the people who stay. The people-pleaser has often developed such a deep belief that love must be earned through sacrifice that they can't understand why anyone would love them for who they are, rather than what they provide. When someone loves you despite your boundaries, despite your refusal to sacrifice yourself, despite your authentic expressions of need and want, it can feel almost threatening because it challenges the very foundation of how you've understood love to work. Learning to receive love without earning it through sacrifice is perhaps one of the most profound healing experiences a recovering people-pleaser can have. It's the moment you realize that you were never unlovable. You were just loving in all the wrong ways. Embracing your forbidden self. The people-pleaser's shadow is packed with all the qualities they've deemed unacceptable. Selfishness, anger, ambition, the desire to be chosen first, the need to be seen and celebrated. These aspects of the psyche haven't disappeared through years of people-pleasing. They've just been pushed underground, creating what Jung called a shadow complex that influences behavior in unconscious and often destructive ways. When you stop people-pleasing, you're forced to confront this shadow, and it's not always pretty. You might discover that you have years of suppressed anger toward people you've been endlessly accommodating. You might realize that you're actually quite ambitious and competitive, qualities you've been hiding because they didn't align with your image as the selfless giver. You might find that you have strong opinions about how you want to be treated, preferences about how you want to spend your time, and desires that have nothing to do with making other people happy. This shadow integration is crucial because the people-pleaser's endless giving often comes from a place of unconscious manipulation. Giving in order to control how others see you, sacrificing in order to avoid rejection, being endlessly nice in order to ensure you'll never be abandoned. True generosity can only come from a place of choice, from someone who has integrated their capacity for selfishness and chooses to give anyway. When you embrace your shadow, your relationships become more honest because you're no longer giving from a place of hidden resentment or unconscious need. You're giving because you want to, because you've chosen to, because it genuinely brings you joy, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. This integration process often involves a period that feels almost rebellious. After years of saying yes to everything, you might find yourself saying no to almost everything. After years of putting others first, you might swing toward putting yourself first in ways that feel selfish or uncomfortable. This isn't permanent. It's part of the psychological pendulum swing that happens when you're finding your center. Eventually, you'll find a balanced place where your giving comes from abundance rather than deficit, where your boundaries come from self-respect rather than fear. The shadow integration also means accepting that you're capable of disappointing people, that you're capable of being disliked, that you're capable of prioritizing your own needs even when it inconveniences others. For the people-pleaser, these realizations can feel like moral failures, but they're actually signs of psychological health and emotional maturity. Finding your true north. There's a profound spiritual dimension to stopping people-pleasing that goes beyond psychology and enters the realm of the sacred. When you've spent your life trying to be everything to everyone, you lose touch with your own spiritual center, your own inner guidance system, your own connection to what Jung called the self, that deeper, wiser part of you that knows your true path. The people-pleaser often mistakes the voices of others for the voice of their own conscience. They think they're being good when they're actually being compliant. They think they're being loving when they're actually being codependent. They think they're being spiritual when they're actually avoiding the spiritual work of becoming who they're meant to be. When you stop people-pleasing, you create space for your authentic spiritual voice to emerge. This voice might tell you things that contradict what you've been taught about goodness, about service, about what it means to be a worthy person. It might guide you toward choices that others don't understand, toward a life that looks selfish from the outside but feels aligned from the inside. This spiritual awakening often involves a period of deep questioning. You might find yourself examining religious or cultural teachings that told you self-sacrifice was the highest virtue. You might question whether the version of love you learned, the one that requires you to disappear, is actually love at all. You might discover that your highest service to the world isn't endlessly accommodating others, but becoming fully yourself and inspiring others to do the same. The recovering people-pleaser often discovers that their true spiritual path involves learning to love themselves with the same intensity they've been loving others. This isn't narcissism, it's the foundation of genuine compassion. You can't give what you don't have, and if you don't have self-love, self-respect, and self-compassion, your giving will always carry the hidden agenda of trying to earn what you can't give yourself. This spiritual awakening also brings with it a deep trust in your own inner guidance. Instead of constantly looking outside yourself for approval and direction, you begin to develop an unshakable trust in your own wisdom, your own intuition, your own connection to something larger than yourself. This doesn't mean you become isolated or stop caring about others. It means you care for others from a place of wholeness rather than emptiness. Authenticity in work and success. The workplace is often where people-pleasing patterns are most entrenched and where the shift to authenticity can feel most risky. The people-pleaser has usually built their professional identity around being the reliable one, the one who never complains, the one who takes on extra work without being asked, the one who makes everyone else's job easier by sacrificing their own boundaries. When you stop people-pleasing at work, several profound shifts occur. First, you begin to advocate for yourself in ways that might feel uncomfortable but are necessary for your professional growth. You start speaking up in meetings instead of staying silent to avoid potential conflict. You begin to take credit for your work instead of deflecting praise. You set boundaries around your time and energy instead of being available for every crisis and emergency. This professional authenticity often reveals how much of your career success was built on self-sacrifice rather than genuine value creation. The people-pleaser often excels at work not because they're the most talented, but because they're the most accommodating. When you stop being endlessly accommodating, you're forced to develop real skills, to find your unique value proposition, to contribute in ways that go beyond just being easy to work with. The shift can be professionally disorienting, because you might realize that some of your success was built on patterns that weren't sustainable or authentic. But what emerges is often a more solid, more sustainable kind of professional success, one based on genuine competence, clear communication, and healthy boundaries rather than endless accommodation and self-sacrifice. You might discover that you're actually more ambitious than you allowed yourself to believe, more competitive than you thought was acceptable, more interested in recognition and advancement than you were comfortable admitting. The people-pleaser often suppresses their professional ambitions because they don't want to seem selfish or difficult, but these ambitions are part of their authentic self and need to be integrated and expressed in healthy ways. The professional revolution also involves learning to handle workplace conflict and competition in new ways. Instead of avoiding conflict by always accommodating others, you learn to engage in healthy professional disagreement. Instead of stepping back from competition to avoid seeming aggressive, you learn to compete with integrity while still maintaining your values. This shift often leads to better professional relationships, because your colleagues begin to see you as an equal rather than someone who exists to make their lives easier. Respect often increases even if likability temporarily decreases, and you discover that being respected for your authentic professional self feels far better than being liked for your accommodating persona. How your authenticity transforms others. Perhaps the most beautiful consequence of stopping people-pleasing is how your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic too. When you stop performing endless niceness, the people around you no longer feel pressure to perform it either. When you start expressing your real feelings and needs, others feel safer expressing theirs. When you demonstrate that love and acceptance don't require self-sacrifice, you free others from the exhausting burden of earning worthiness through endless giving. This ripple effect is particularly powerful in family systems. If you're the family people-pleaser, Your shift toward authenticity often disrupts generational patterns of emotional suppression and boundary violations. Your children, if you have them, learn that they don't need to be perfect to be loved. Your spouse learns that healthy relationships involve two whole people rather than one person sacrificing for the other. Your parents might initially resist your boundaries, but they also might discover relief in not having to manage your emotions anymore. The ripple effect extends into your broader social circles as well. Your friends begin to feel more comfortable saying no to things they don't want to do. Your colleagues start setting their own boundaries around work demands. Your acquaintances feel less pressure to perform perfect lives because you're modeling what it looks like to be honestly, imperfectly human. This transformation doesn't happen because you're preaching or teaching. It happens because authenticity is contagious. When people see someone living with genuine self-respect, expressing their needs without apology, giving from abundance rather than deficit, it awakens something in them that remembers what it feels like to be whole. The ripple effect also includes attracting new people into your life who are drawn to authenticity rather than accommodation. These relationships feel different from the beginning because they're based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than unequal exchanges of care and attention. You discover what it feels like to be chosen for who you are rather than what you provide. Some people find this ripple effect overwhelming at first because they're used to being needed for their people-pleasing rather than wanted for their authentic self. Learning to trust that you're valuable beyond your utility to others is a profound shift that touches the very core of self-worth and identity. The ultimate ripple effect is that your authenticity becomes a gift to the world, not because you're trying to help or heal anyone, but because your wholeness gives others permission to pursue their own wholeness. Your refusal to live a half-life inspires others to stop settling for less than they deserve. The journey from people-pleasing to authenticity isn't a simple behavioral change. It's a complete transformation of how you understand love, relationships, success, and your own worth. It's the difference between living as a supporting character in everyone else's story and finally stepping into the starring role of your own life. When you stop pleasing everyone, you don't become selfish, you become whole. You don't lose love. You discover what real love actually feels like. You don't become difficult. You become honest about what's always been difficult for you. You don't hurt people. You stop enabling their unconscious patterns while simultaneously healing your own. The world needs your authenticity more than it needs your accommodation. It needs your real voice more than your performed agreeableness. It needs your boundaries more than your endless availability. It needs your example of what it looks like to love yourself enough to live as yourself, fully and unapologetically. The people who are meant to be in your life will celebrate this transformation. The ones who resist it were never truly seeing you anyway. They were relating to your function, not your essence. And discovering the difference between the two is perhaps the most liberating realization you can have. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. Subscribe to continue exploring the deepest truths about what it means to be fully, courageously human. Your real life is waiting for you to finally show up and claim it.